2 years. That's how long Silo 18 has left before the lights go out for good. Not because of a rebellion. Not because of the algorithm. Because somebody stole 50 years' worth of light bulbs, and nobody in charge even knows who did it yet. That single detail buried in Episode 5 of Silo Season 3 is bigger than the reveal everyone's talking about. Bigger than Bernard surviving the fire. Bigger than Juliette getting her memory back. Because it means the silo doesn't need a safeguard to kill everyone. It just needs the crops to fail. I'm going to walk you through everything Episode 5 actually confirmed, everything it strongly implies but never says outright, and where the next 5 episodes are almost certainly headed. Stick around for the section on Camille and Robert Sims, because I think most recaps are getting their marriage completely wrong. Let's get into it. Titled Memory, Episode 5 is structured almost entirely as a flashback. It rewinds to the exact moment the Season 2 finale cut to black, Juliette and Bernard trapped together in that burning airlock, and rebuilds the 18 months of silence in between. Here's what gets confirmed on screen. Bernard didn't die. He was pulled out badly burned, and instead of letting the silo see him, Robert Sims hid him in a section of the mechanical level nobody official ever visits, a space the show calls the Digger Void. According to multiple outlets covering the episode, that decision started as a strangulation. Camille, following an order from the algorithm, tells Robert to kill Bernard. He goes through with the setup, gets as far as sealing the bag, and stops. That detail matters more than it seems. Robert Sims doesn't defy the algorithm because he's had a change of heart. He defies it because Bernard, in his final moments before what should have been an execution, tells him something that changes the entire calculation. There isn't just one silo. There are roughly 50 of them, all connected to a central authority that can end any single silo instantly through something called the safeguard. Sims realizes that killing Bernard doesn't protect Silo 18. It just removes the one person who understands the real threat. So instead, Sims builds a cover story. The official record says Bernard died in the fire. Juliette survived and gets pushed into the mayor's office as a symbol the silo can rally around. Behind that story, Sims is running a second operation nobody else can see, feeding Bernard, hiding him, and slowly assembling people who can help Juliette recover the parts of her memory the drugs erased. That here's where the episode gets genuinely clever instead of just filling in blanks. For most of Season 3, Juliette has been walking around the silo with fragments missing. Not because her brain was damaged in the fire, but because she's been kept on what the show calls forgetting drugs, a chemical suppression system administered specifically to keep people who know too much from reconstructing what they know. The Order, which is essentially the version of the silo's founding rulebook reserved only for the head of IT and their shadow, apparently spells this out directly. Anyone on the drugs has to be kept away from personal relics, because relics are the one thing the chemistry can't fully block. Sims figures this out because Bernard told him, and once he knows it, he weaponizes it. Not against Juliette, but for her. He starts quietly reintroducing artifacts from her old life. A page from a nature book, sheriff badges that had been circulating among people who saw her as some kind of symbol. None of it lands cleanly. Fragments surface, but nothing connects. Then Hank hands her a watch that belonged to her father. It's an emotional moment, and it's meant to be one, but notice what it doesn't do. It doesn't unlock the memory chain the resistance actually needs. That's intentional. The show is drawing a distinction between an object that carries emotional weight and an object that sits inside the specific sequence of events tied to the real conspiracy. The item that actually works is a Pez dispenser that once belonged to George, the engineer Juliette lost early in the show's run. George is the reason Juliette started pulling this thread in the first place. The dispenser doesn't just remind her of him. It reconnects the entire investigative chain. George, the hard drive he left behind, the recording that exposed the truth about what's really outside the silo, the cleaning that sent her out the airlock, everything that happened in Silo 17, and finally, what she learned about the safeguard itself. Once that chain snaps back into place, Juliette isn't just herself again. She becomes the only living person inside Silo 18 who has actually seen the full shape of the conspiracy from outside its normal boundaries. That's a much bigger deal than a personal reunion. It's a strategic asset, and everyone around her immediately starts treating it that way. That if you've watched enough prestige television, You know the standard shape of a resistance storyline. A charismatic leader emerges. People rally. Information spreads. The rebellion grows until it's big enough to fight back. Episode 5 quietly rejects that entire template, and I think it's the smartest structural choice Season 3 has made so far. Look at who actually knows what by the end of this episode. Bernard understands the safeguard, the order, and the existence of the other silos, but he's physically hidden and officially dead. Juliette has direct memory of crossing to Silo 17 and surviving it, but large parts of her recovery are still incomplete. Sims can move people and manufacture political outcomes, but he doesn't have the technical knowledge to act on what he knows. Camille has access to the algorithm's instructions, but by her own admission to Robert, she can't share what those instructions actually are. Walker has a radio capable of doing more than anyone realized, but she doesn't yet know who might be listening on the other end. Billings is investigating a murder without knowing it's connected to a resource crisis that could kill the whole silo anyway. Nobody has the full picture, and that's not a flaw in the writing. Multiple recaps covering this episode have picked up on the same idea, that this is a system built entirely around the idea that centralized information is what gets people caught. A silo, after all, is also a word for information kept in an isolated compartment. The algorithm's entire strategy depends on collecting scattered data points and turning them into one legible pattern. It can spot a leader. It can spot a meeting. It can spot a courier moving between groups. What it struggles to model is a group of people who each hold one piece and refuse, deliberately or not, to combine them. That's why Robert Sims becomes such an interesting character this season. He spent years being dismissed by Bernard as useful, but limited, good at managing people, not deep enough for the real work. Turns out the skill Bernard undervalued, the ability to compartmentalize, to run an operation through intermediaries and staged appearances without exposing the center of it, is exactly the skill this fight requires. The episode ends on a quiet image. Camille and Robert standing apart, looking at each other across a room, saying nothing. Most surface-level recaps read this as a moment of suspicion. Camille clocking that her husband is working against the algorithm's instructions. I'd push back on that reading a little. Think about what we already know about how the algorithm evaluates loyalty. This isn't a system that just listens to what people say. It reads behavior, stress responses, and the physical signals that come with deception. Camille, who now effectively runs IT under the algorithm's direction, would understand that better than almost anyone in the silo. Which means the safest thing she can do, if she wants her husband to succeed, is to genuinely not know what he's doing. If Robert never tells her where Bernard is hidden, she can be interrogated and truthfully say she doesn't know. If Camille never gives Robert a direct order to protect Juliette, he can act without carrying evidence of a coordinated plan. Neither of them has to lie under pressure, because neither of them is holding the full truth to begin with. That's not a marriage falling apart. That's two people who trust each other's ultimate goal. Almost certainly the survival of their son, and by extension the survival of the silo, while deliberately staying blind to each other's methods. It's the same compartmentalization strategy the whole resistance is built on, just happening inside one household instead of across a whole silo. If that reading holds, we should expect the back half of this season to keep that gap open rather than close it. A clean confession scene between them would actually be a bad sign for how this ends. While all of this is unfolding, Sheriff Billings is chasing a smaller mystery that turns out to connect to the biggest thread in the entire season. Orla Kent was originally reported as a casualty of a mine fumigation accident. Episode 5 confirms that was false. She was murdered, and her body was moved to make the death look accidental. What she'd actually stumbled onto was a theft. Roughly 50 years' worth of lighting equipment missing from critical supply, equipment the farms depend on to keep food production running. Run the math on that for a second. Silo 18's remaining light stock is estimated to last around 2 years. That's not a slow background problem. That's a second countdown clock running parallel to the safeguard. And unlike the safeguard, nobody has to flip a switch to trigger it. It just happens on its own if the theft isn't stopped or the missing supply isn't recovered. The suspects span multiple departments: supply, construction, mining, which suggests deliberately that no single person is running this operation. It likely works the same way the resistance does. One person opens access, another disguises the movement, Another receives the material at the other end, and possibly none of them fully understand what the full operation is building toward. Orla became dangerous the moment she started connecting those separate pieces into one story, which is exactly why she had to be removed before that story reached Juliette. Whether this theft is being run by an internal faction planning some kind of escape, an expansion of Silo 18's boundaries, or something tied to the wider 50 Silo network, the show hasn't confirmed yet. But the scale tells you it isn't a one-time smuggling operation. 50 years of infrastructure means somebody is planning to build something that lasts. Episode 5 also checks back in on Daniel and Helen, still digging through the conspiracy in the show's flashback timeline decades before the silos were sealed. Their investigation is closing in on a wealthy, connected figure tied to a clinic running memory-altering treatments, and, based on what Daniel reveals to Helen in the car, possibly connected to whatever really happened aboard a naval vessel during an operation referred to only as Righteous Vengeance. Then the episode does something that reframes the entire threat. Daniel realizes, mid-conversation, that the vehicle they're driving is no longer under his control. Someone, or something, has remotely taken it over. Several outlets covering the episode have pointed out this isn't just a chase scene for tension. It's the show's clearest hint yet that whatever they're investigating already has the ability to reach into ordinary infrastructure and use it as a weapon. Daniel and Helen think they're moving covertly. In reality, they might already be inside a system that can see exactly where they are. That detail lines up uncomfortably well with everything happening inside Silo 18 in the present timeline. Both storylines are now built around the same core fear. A system that doesn't need brute force to control people because it already controls the infrastructure people depend on to feel safe. Episode 6, titled The Drive, lands August 7th on Apple TV+, followed by Episode 7, Radio, the week after. Season 3 runs 10 episodes total, and it's already been confirmed as the show's penultimate season, with a fourth and final season set to close the story out completely. Based on where Episode 5 leaves things, here's what I'd expect the next stretch to focus on. Juliette's memory is back, but that only tells her what needs to be done. Sealing the safeguard pipe, understanding what's left of the situation in Silo 17. It doesn't hand her a plan for executing any of it. Billings and Hank are set up to stumble onto a new lead in the bulb theft, and the official Episode 6 synopsis specifically teases that discovery. Meanwhile, Daniel and Helen are described as receiving what's being called a surprising proposition, which suggests the car hijacking isn't the end of that thread. It's an opening move by whoever's actually pulling the strings. If the compartmentalization theory holds, don't expect a big team-up scene where everyone lays their cards on the table. Expect the opposite. Expect Sims to keep moving Bernard without telling Juliette exactly where. Expect Camille to keep her distance from the operational details. That fragmentation is the whole survival strategy, and breaking it early would undercut everything Episode 5 just spent an hour building. What makes Episode 5 work isn't really the shock of Bernard being alive. Season 3 already gave that away at the end of Episode 4. What makes it work is the argument underneath it. That in a world run by a surveillance system built to find patterns, the only real defense is refusing to form one. Juliette's memory came back because the truth was never stored in one place. It lived in a person, an object, a location, a relationship. Erase her mind, and the rest of it survives anyway. That's either the Resistance's biggest advantage, or it's exactly the kind of blind spot a system smart enough to predict organized behavior would want them to believe they have. 2 years of light left. 50 silos connected to something none of them fully understand. A marriage running on silence instead of trust. That's where Silo Season 3 stands at the halfway point. And I don't think a single character in this show currently has enough information to see where it's actually headed. If you want the Episode 6 breakdown the moment it drops, subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop your theory on who's really behind the bulb theft in the comments. I'll be reading through them before the next video goes up.